Welcome to the session, everybody. It's really lovely to see you. We know, Kate and I were just saying how exhausted you must be. If your camera's on, show me a nod if you're feeling a bit tired towards the end of term. There's a few nods there. We do understand that. I mean, what a term, what an NQT year for you all as well. A huge well done for keeping going during these challenging times. I hope you've enjoyed having your children back. So show me some nods if you're happy having your class back. Yes, there's quite a few nods there as well. And I'm sure it's lovely having your schools full again and teaching in the way that we're more used to, and having children actually in front of us. So a warm welcome to the session. I'm going to hand over to Kate Browning in a minute, who's leading our session. For the purposes of the session, when Kate's doing her input, you can turn your cameras off and keep your microphones muted. There are about 3 opportunities where we'll go into a breakout room. And for those, you will need to put your camera and your microphone on to talk to your colleagues. And I'll remind you of that as we come up to those points in the session as well. I think that's everything for now from me. So if you want to turn your cameras off and mute yourselves. And I'm going to introduce Kate Browning, who's been working with Gateway for many years now, Kate. And, is super passionate. And I'm sure that's going to come across today about supporting all children, and particularly those with SEND. And that's what today's session obviously is, the focus of supporting children through adaptive teaching with SEND. So I'll hand over to Kate for the session.
Thank you very much. That's brilliant. I was trying to think, I think it was 1994 when I was one of you guys in London. Not even heard of the word pandemic then, I don't think. So, but remember the intensity of it all. Yeah, definitely. I don't think that ever leaves you, does it, Sally?
No, I remember my first day in school like it was yesterday.
Oh, definitely. I remember planning, when I was going to open the door, when I was going to sit down, when I was going to take the break. I remember just planning it, like that. So how you're managing that in the middle of a pandemic as well, guys, and remote learning and everything else you've had to be doing, just hats off to you. Seriously, you're going to come out with, a whole load of skills that we never had, that early on. So, but started off like you, primary school teacher for many years, and then moved into Senko role before leadership roles as well, and just SEN has then just become my passion. And I know that many of you may have your own background in terms of your own additional needs. Maybe you may have children, you may have brothers and sisters, and I'm aware of that, and that's all coming into the mix as well. So you'll all come to this session with your own thoughts and feelings around children with special needs and disabilities. But I want to just reassure you that, they are the hardest kids to teach, really challenging, but they do make you great teachers. And hopefully you'll get a sense of that as you go through your career. Okay, so I'm going to share my screen now. So there was a activity for you to do, which I know you've watched the previous session, which I asked you to look at, which was around the graduated approach. So hopefully you've got a sense now of what that means. This assess, plan, do, review cycle. Hopefully you're beginning to think, I do that anyway. I do it for all children. So really it's not needing to sort of think about it as a separate notion that we do with children with special needs, but actually it's just part of what we do anyway. It's just more formalized when we're talking about children on the SEN register. So hopefully you've got a good sense of that, because I just want you to keep living and breathing that as you go through your teaching every day. So I also introduced you a gap task, because one of the absolute prerequisites of knowing how you're going to go about adapting your teaching to meet those children's needs is, first of all, having an understanding of what those needs are as they present to you at the moment. You may not have the whole picture. You may not be completely crystal clear with what's going on. Okay, but we need to have some sense of where that child is at, which is why I gave you that gap task that I did. So that's the graduated approach. hopefully you kind of, that makes sense to you now. And this was the gap task activity I asked you to do. I asked you to think about a child that you're teaching at the moment, maybe with already identified SEN, maybe just a child that no identified SEN at the moment, but a child that you're concerned about. And what are you seeing above the waterline, above the iceberg, that's causing you concern? Might be in the work they're producing or not producing, in the way they are communicating, in the way they maybe are behaving, and then just trying to think, okay, that's what I'm seeing above the waterline, but what might be the reasons for that? And that is the skill that you need to grow and develop. Just be thinking reflectively, why is that? What's going on with that child in terms of why can't they understand? I've been working on this all the way through the week, and I think they've got it by Friday, and then Monday morning it's gone again. Why is that happening? Or why is that child sort of engaging or disengaging, or permanently disruptive, or is struggling to remember, just recall new information, or they have lots of great ideas, they're speaking lots of great ideas, but they can't get it down on the paper. So why might that be? All right, so hopefully you've had to think about that. And what Sally's going to do now is put you into breakout groups, because I want you to just have a chat with each other about what you found out. And then when we come back together afterwards, we're going to use the chat function to feedback. Okay, so I'm going to ask some of you just to, or any of you really who want to, just to put into that chat box what you saw, just what maybe one thing that you think above the waterline, and what one of those reasons might be. All right, but it's good to hear what everybody else is found out as well. So, okay, Sally. So Sally's going to put you into the group.
Lovely. Thanks, Kate. So I'm going to send you off into breakout rooms. There should be 5 of you per room. So just a reminder, you'll need to put your cameras and your mics back on. If there's any problems and you're in a room on your own for some reason, just come back to the main room and we'll reassign you. It's not a problem. Okay. And how long for this task, Kate?
Oh, yes. Shall we say about 8 minutes or so?
8 minutes. Lovely.
Being a bit specific, isn't it? But yeah.
We'll send you off now. We'll give you a minute's warning when you're on your way back to the main room. Welcome back to the main room, everybody. If you want to put your comments in the chat, if there are any key points you want to share with the wider group, and if you want to mute your microphones and turn off your cameras again, that would be great.
Fabulous. Thank you, people. So what we're looking for in the chat box is something that you've seen or observed with the child, and why you think that the underlying reason for that might be. So or you know it to be, maybe you're quite clear on that. So jump in there on the chat box, that would be great. Thank you.
Yeah, they're all back now.
Sorry, did I start speaking too soon? I probably did there, didn't I, Sally?
No, I think it was only 1 or 2. I think they were
all right
in the room.
Okay, so just coming in there on the chat box now, people. So just sharing with us what you think you've seen with a child in terms of either their work, their behaviour, the way they communicate, what the reason for that might be. So Ellie's saying repeated calling out, impulse to express ideas. Yes, so we've got a child there who is it, could on the face of it be say, well, that child's not following the rules. You're not putting your hand up. You're being disrespectful, but actually it might be underlying reason for that might be just an compulsion of a bit, possibly that sort of ADHD kind of thing where this need to express whatever's just floating through their mind. So again, that child will certainly need strategies, won't they, to support them in maybe learning to take turns. Burst of anger and upset. Oh, that's so distressing to see, isn't it? And all behaviour is communication. So Danielle thinks low self-esteem, unable to self-regulate his emotions. Yeah, so children, generally speaking, they don't want to do this, do they? But there's that, yeah. So some support around what are those sort of what's going on, what is the underlying anxiety there, and what strategies can we support that child to deal with those feelings and emotions in a more self-regulated way. And that can take, for some children, can take quite some time, particularly if the root of all that is maybe some trauma to that there. But I like to think of all behaviour as an inappropriate problem-solving technique. You know, that child's bursting out in anger and upset is trying to solve a problem. We need to find out what that problem is they're trying to solve by doing what they're doing. Disruption at home that's been impacted on recent school closures. Yeah, so how might that sort of, and under the iceberg, above the iceberg, Tom, that might present itself in, you know, anxiety, disengagement, reluctance to come to school, maybe. Yeah, so that's going to take time to settle, isn't it? So it's going to be lots of settling in, lots of talking, opportunities like that. So continuous movement, how interesting. Yeah, Gabriella. I wonder why we think that might be continuous movement. There's potentially something there around maybe a sensory processing need. So that constant movement is sometimes needed by children just to get to feel where they are in space. Yeah, so actually having things to touch and hold on to and be tight around them can sometimes calm them, can't they? So little adjustments like that. Maybe talk to parents about that, what's going on there. Anxiety in general and avoidance to learning on occasion. I no longer have my TA that he became dependent on. Also has a new baby brother. So yeah, quite a lot going on in that young person's life as well. And it's difficult when you haven't got another adult there to sort of deal with that in the background and settle that child. So needing to find out from perhaps talking to child and mother, what can we do to help that settling and engagement, maybe use of another child, maybe potentially to support them there. Social behaviour has worsened after schools, reopening. Basically, you know, they haven't had a lot of as much social interaction. So maybe some of those skills have been a bit lost or not practiced. So maybe some explicit practice is needed in order to bring that back on board as well. Not wanting to follow rules. Now that's interesting because children, generally speaking, actually quite like some structure. So why is it that child is not wanting to follow those rules? There could be lots of reasons for that to get under the skin of, Jess. Seen not engaging, very distracted, not doing work. You're suspecting potential dyslexia or specific learning difficulty. Great, Joseph. You know, certainly what you're going to need to get that magnifying glass close up to that child now and try to find out in what context is that child not engaging. What context are they feeling distracted and not doing work? And yeah, get to the bottom of that. Bit of investigation to go do there, isn't there? Yeah, no attendance. Well, if they're not attending, you know, we're not going to be seeing great progress, are we? So getting to the bottom of that. Screaming, shouting, fiddling, rocking, no eye contact. That's suggesting some anxiety there and some sensory issue potentially as well. The rocking, that's proprioception. Again, that child struggling to feel secure in where they are in space. And certainly screaming, shouting, they're fighting against some degree of anxiety that's there. And no eye contact can be, you know, indicative of potentially an autism kind of profile. Lack of concentration, not following instructions, but knowing there are home issues regarding food may mean that child is, just actually thinking about Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Actually, we've got a child who's pretty hungry and is struggling to concentrate and stay engaged because of that. Yeah, so just that's a useful thing to think about, actually, is just talk about those basic needs. Are they being met, first of all? Disassociated from class environment, withdrawn. Oh, that's a real worry, isn't it? As much of a worry as a child who's acting out. Highly stressful home environment, possibly abusive. So we're talking about traumatized child there. So building relationships is going to take time, but it's going to be absolutely key. Hopefully you know, over the first few years in your training, if you've not already had training on attachment and trauma, then that's going to be really important for all of you, but particularly you there, Michael, in understanding what's going on for that young person. Not engaged, head on desk, saying they're not good enough to do the work. Anxieties now that everyone is back at school. Was in during the whole of lockdown. A case of maybe getting some attention, getting what they needed, but now more children back in. Maybe there's some anxiety there, some comparing themselves. Lots of need for reassurance there. Again, we're talking quite a bit here, aren't we, about those social and emotional needs to be addressed even before the learning needs, really. Constantly out of seat, calling out negative language, lack of social skills with peers. Yeah, could be a lot of reasons, Sarah, why that's going on. It'd be interesting to know whether there were certain contexts where that's happening and not happening. What is that who or to what is that negative language directed at? Will be interesting to find out. But certainly some intervening, some support around social skills and developing friendships is certainly needed there. Standing alone at break time, not engaging in more social activities during lesson time, such as PE, suddenly feels ill. Extremely engaged in individual activities such as reading. So yeah, happy when they know what they're doing, they're in control, but not knowing how to you know, socially engage. What are the rules around how I work in a team in PE, or how do I actually go about, you know, making friends and engaging in those playtimes. So potentially looking at an autism sort of profile, autistic profile there, and going to need some very specific support and help in knowing how to do that. Otherwise, we could end up with a very unhappy child moving forward. Struggles with change, as well as a lack of eye contact and social skills. Again, we're looking at a potential autism profile there, possibly, but struggles with change. So needing to be given the heads up of, you know, social stories maybe might help there, but also visual timetables and things like that is going to be important. So fabulous, people. Really great that you have started to think about what's above and below that iceberg, and being really intuitive and thoughtful, particularly around the social emotional side of things as well, but not automatically assuming that because you're seeing disruptive behavior, that's just somebody is just not obeying the rules, but there's a reason behind that needs to be got to the bottom of. Not that it's not important to have those boundaries, but trying to get to underneath the skin of why that might be. So happy with that. Well done. Okay, so what I put here is a bit of an image that I want you to hold on to in your heads. And that's that image of those barriers to the learning being like bricks. Yeah. And they're preventing you, enabling that child to progress and to develop. And what you're trying to find out is what are those bricks made up of? What is the nature of those bricks? And some children have a few bricks, and some children have a blinking load of them, you know, all well cemented in from a very early age. And it's really challenging. But we got to try and find ways around that. And we don't always solve it. We don't always get there in one go. But in assessing, planning, doing, reviewing, we are bit by bit trying to understand what those bricks are, and then trying to find in imaginative ways to get around them. So we talked about sort of down the left-hand side there in blue, there's, you know, some ill health may be one of those bricks. That child that somebody mentioned who, you know, actually hadn't had breakfast in the morning, you know, that's going to be one of those basic things there. Instability at home, you mentioned a lot. Attendance, you mentioned. Yeah, lack of sleep, food, attachments, you mentioned. Self-esteem, you mentioned. EAL as well, English as additional language, may be featuring in there somewhere. And a known disability affecting learning and development. And many of you just sort of described a bit of an autism profile, maybe ADHD, yeah, there. And as yet, maybe unrecognised SCN. Actually, there may be, you know, that's actually not, sort of, we're not very clear at the moment. So it needing to think, are those needs around the cognition and learning sort of zone, or maybe around communication interaction. So that's around speech, language and communication needs, or interaction in terms of social communication and the autism profile. Social, emotional, mental health needs may not be have identified yet, or sensory and physical. So we mentioned quite a few examples there around potentially sensory needs being what's underneath the iceberg. And then getting even closer up then in those green examples there, we might be thinking about getting really close up and thinking, actually, what's the working memory like here in enabling that child to hold on to information that we're presenting to them. Maybe there's an attention deficit, fine motor control, gross motor control, visual auditory processing. How well are they able to take on board visual information and process that? Auditory, words, language, grammar. Is that a challenge for them? Is that why they're not following my instructions and are disengaged and are, going off task? Their receptive language, so sort of building on that really, how well are they understanding the words that we're using? There might be gaps in learning, actually things that I might be teaching in year 5 or year 6, but actually and we're making assumptions that there might be learning that, you think they already know how to count backwards over the tens boundary, but actually maybe they don't. And maybe that's one of the reasons why they're struggling with development in maths. Sensory processing we mentioned as well. Now, down the right-hand side, in red, I want us to think about how sometimes we may inadvertently actually put another brick in. We might end up adding to those barriers to learning, or we might end up, cementing them in and actually thinking maybe, actually being part of the problem. And I'm sure, you all have plenty of empathy, but, sometimes that can be the case. Maybe, you've got a blanket approach to disruptive behavior that doesn't really take account of what the reason for that might be. And maybe that's actually not helping the situation. Low expectations are going to be a challenge. When we put children on the SEN register, the big danger is we can suddenly then just not expect as much from them. And we've really got to counter that. We've got to try and make sure we're it might take that child longer to get there, but that's not to say they can't. Yeah, we need to keep those expectations high. It might be you have preconceptions about that child, maybe from what the previous teacher or TAs have told you about them, and we're expecting the worst. Steps in learning, maybe we're actually not breaking down our learning into small enough steps, and that might not be helping. We'll come on to that in a minute. Okay. So think about that. Try and remember that analogy, and then try and think about, in either breaking down those barriers, like the red arrow, we're literally just going to actually see what they are and then shining a light on them, deal with them, and actually we can break through. Sometimes there are some of those bricks we can't. Sometimes, the trauma that's gone on in the past, we can't fix that. We can't take that away. But actually, maybe there's ways around that. And sometimes it's a slow process, particularly with children who are very traumatized, but we can get there. It's all is not lost. Okay. So, so our aim really today is to get really much more into strategies, what we're going to do in the day-to-day classroom. So inclusive strategies that can help you adapt your lessons so that children with SEN are more able to engage and make good progress. Now, this isn't meaning necessarily something additional, different that you do for that child and that child alone, but we're trying to think of as many of these things that actually we can make these adaptations, and actually they enable a whole load of other children to engage and access the lesson more effectively as well. So we're talking about trying to ensure that our lessons and our classroom environment is more inclusive by the way we design it in the first place. And then also I'm going to help make sure you know where to go when you need some more information about certain areas of need and disabilities and things like that. So we'll do that towards the end. Okay, so starting points here, first of all, people, is to first of all think about where you are planning your teaching for children, and particularly children we're talking about with SEN here. The importance of knowing their starting point. So one of our colleagues earlier on talks about a child who is really struggling with their learning, and it might be potentially a dyslexic kind of profile potentially. So we needed to think where that child is at the starting point. So when we're setting our learning intention or learning objective and our success criteria, is it a suitable level of challenge for them? So are we sure that we are going to be building on that last piece of secure and independent understanding, knowledge, or skill? So think about, it's a bit of a crude analogy here, but just think about a bit of a ladder. Okay, so we need to make sure we know which rung of the ladder in, say, math development in number, maybe, or in development in phonics or writing sentences, which rung of the ladder they're able to stand on. And is that rung of the ladder really well nailed in? Yeah, or is it actually a bit weak and wobbly? So if you put too much weight on it in trying maybe to reach to the next rung of the ladder, it's actually all going to come crashing down. Or maybe they can stand on that rung of the ladder, but they need someone to hold them on it. Yeah, well, that's no good, because we can't continue to hold that child. You know, at some point, that child needs to be able to sort of take off themselves. So knowing where that starting point is really important. And then we know how far apart that next rung of the ladder needs to be set. Yeah, because if it's too high, they won't be able to reach it. Yeah, too low, maybe, and we're dumbing down our expectations. Now, we're expecting them all to get to the same place. Yeah, we're not saying, oh, the child will never get there. You know, they've got special needs. You know, that's sometimes called the soft bigotry of low expectations. Or what I sometimes see is the bless factor. You know, bless. Well, they do the best they can, you know, but they have got special needs. You know, we don't want to be thinking that. We want to get that mindset out of our heads. We're having those high expectations, but we need to take account of where they're at in their learning to start with. So do we need, maybe, because actually that rung in the ladder isn't well enough nailed in, do we need to plan for a prior, smaller stepped intention in their learning? You know, we need to actually plan a little bit further back just to make sure that really is secure before we move on. So addressing any gaps and misconceptions that may be there. Actually planning for further application, additional practice, consolidation. Actually, I don't feel at the moment that child is really, I think we were getting somewhere last week. We were nearly there, but actually we need a bit more practice here before we can be really secure and move on. Or actually, no. Actually, I think we can move on now. Actually, we need to plan for the next step. We can actually move on. Okay, so, sorry, I've got the wrong slide there. I will come back to that in a minute. So to that end, I'd like you to have a look at this piece of work. Okay, so this is a photograph I took of a piece of work by Lewis. And Lewis was asked to write a story about a witch using full stops and capital letters. And this is what he was able to produce. And the teaching assistant wrote, "I like your hat." And the reason why the teaching assistant wrote that was because actually what you can't see above this was a picture he drew of a witch with a hat on. I couldn't take a photograph of it, and for you to be able to see the writing, it was going to be too blurred. And then the teacher marked it by saying, "A lovely sentence, Lewis, well done." Okay, so first of all, I want you to think, in terms of expectation at this point for the child to be able to write a story with full stops and capital letters, is that appropriate? And also, I want you to think, what would you do next? If that was what you got back from a child in your class, and this child was year 2, what would you think would be the next thing you would need to do? Okay, so what I'm going to ask you to do now, and I'm just wondering, actually, Sally, if people go into their breakout, so they're not going to be able to see this anymore.
No, they won't be able to. So it might be that we just
Okay.
to do it individually and we put comments in the chat?
Yes, please. So have a look at that for a few minutes. I'm going to have to, in order to see the chat, I think I'm going to have to stop screen sharing. So, so I'll give you sort of 3 or 4 minutes to have a look at that and just start having a think. And then I'd like to see some of your responses in the chat box. Okay. Thanks, people.
Thanks, Kate. And if you want to keep sight of that, once Kate does take it off the screen, if you've got your mobile phone handy, just take a quick picture of it.
Oh, what a good idea. Okay, I'm going to stop the screen share now so that I can see the chat box. Okay, folks, so if you did want to just take a picture, if you haven't had enough time to just look at it, then do so now. Fabulous. Okay, people. So what are your thoughts then about that expectation at that point for Lewis? Do we think that was something that he actually was the next rung in the ladder that he's going to be able to reach? What do we think? So, Jodie, I'll probably take a step back and look at writing a sentence rather than a story. Yeah, so I think implicitly what you're saying there is, yeah, Joseph, yeah, not matching expectations. Yeah, so we're not actually really that the expectation from Lewis at that point to be able to write a story with a sentence, full stop, he wasn't ready. That's certainly up there. That is the expectation. We want him to be able to do that. We're going to believe he can do that. Yeah. Oh, beg your pardon. Even if, you know, other children are way ahead of him in that sense, just because other children are way ahead of him, it doesn't mean to say that he's not ever going to get there. Yeah. So what do we suggest then that we need to do? So Jodie's saying, take a step back, looking at writing a sentence rather than a story. Okay. Also looks though each child might need to have some phonics work because the words are not easily identifiable. Yeah. And may perhaps introduce additional scaffolding, word mats, substitution tables as well, if the aim is to get them to use capital letters, full stops rather than subject matter. Okay. Joseph, next step, letter formation, handwriting focus, pen grip. Needs to work on letter formation, help with sentences, phonics, yeah. Capital letters or full stops, intervention needed, writing sentence, okay. Separate target, okay. Formation support needed, right. I'm going to stop you there, folks. Just pause there for a minute, okay, before you write anything else in the chat box. What I'm seeing here are lots of absolutely fabulous ideas. All right. You are coming out with lots of great things. But what I want to draw your attention to is Heather's comment and Kieran's comment. So what have Heather and Kieran just done? They've both asked a question. And that's absolutely where we need to get to. Because if we're thinking about what we need to do next for this child, where do we need to go first? Think about assess, plan, do, review. Can somebody just put in the chat box, which of those are we needing to step on? Are we needing to step at assess, plan, do, or review? Thank you. Yes, brilliant. Thanks both. It is we're at assess. We need to ask some questions. We need to get the magnifying glass up because, again, before we can even think about how we need to intervene, what we need to do to adapt, we need to figure out what on earth is going on with Lewis at the moment. You know, this is above the iceberg. This is what we're seeing. What is going on? So we've got Heather suggesting, is there a fine motor issue here? Yeah. So how are they holding their pencil? You know, is that a good pencil grip? What's that letter formation like? And the other question, I'll try to find it now. Yes, brilliant, Kieran. Actually, can they read it back? You know, that's going to tell you a lot, isn't it? Is that making sense to Lewis himself? Yes, and Kieran, once you've understood the words they have written, you can provide intervention support, certain letter formation. Yes, so we're needing to get under the skin of what is secure with Lewis and what isn't. So back in the chat box, people, what other questions are you, what are you going to assess? What else do you want to find out? Okay, so we've got around fine motor, yeah, and whether or not he can read what is written. What else do we need to find out? Thinking about that rung on the ladder, how secure they are. What do we need to know? Okay, so what we got coming in here? Okay, yeah, understanding the learning intention. So, okay, does he understand what we mean by a story? What does he mean? Full stop and capital letter? Yeah, okay, yeah. What phonics stage is on? Yes. Okay, so this is getting to the nitty gritty. Encoding, decoding. You know, which letters is he secure with? Which is he not? Understanding of language. Does he understand what we mean by a which, let alone a hat or anything like that? Does he? So what's that receptive language like? Is he able to speak a sentence? You know, we're going to have a real challenge, aren't we, getting a child to write a sentence until they can speak a sentence. Joseph said about his reading level. That is so important. Can he read a sentence? Can he read a full stop? We read full stops, don't we? Yeah, we could feel a full stop. Can he read a sentence and feel that full stop? I would argue he's not quite at the full stop stage at the moment, but does he know how to? Yeah. So do we have I think we're some way off that, aren't we? I think we're really about putting words, you know, letters together to make words and words together to make sentences. Phonic knowledge important there. Yeah. So there's a lot of speech and language, you know, prerequisites here needing to do. So actually, maybe it's about, you know, just breaking down, you know, that learning, first of all, to understand where he's at in that ability to understand what a sentence is and speak that sentence, sequence words. What's his grammar like? I wanted to know how expressive he is in his language first of all. So when you've got a clearer knowledge of that, then you can go back to all your brilliant ideas that you mentioned earlier on. Really great ideas. And actually then begin to think, okay, so which one of those, which of those which elements of scaffolding are we going to need to do first of all? Which areas of to really focus on in terms of their learning first of all? So great, thank you for that, people. We're going to go back to screen sharing again. Okay. So what we're talking about here, I'm getting a bit technical. You may have looked at this as part of your training already, is Vygotsky, zone of proximal development. So what we're trying to think about with Lewis is planning for his learning to be in this sort of well, it's a greeny blue, I don't know what colour it is really, teal, is it maybe? This greeny blue area here, this zone of proximal development. So it's that activity that was planned for, that learning intention, was a bit out of his reach. Okay, and actually in order to, you could argue, even to begin to be able to reach that there would have been so much scaffolding. It really wouldn't have been an activity I think he probably could have, an intention he could have met even without so much support. It would have meant there wasn't a lot of learning going on. But we don't want to be in this area, either this purple area, where actually they can do the work unassisted and it's not challenging at all. So we're trying to make sure that our learning is pitched in this zone of proximal development, not too hard, not too easy, but in the middle, where we're actually needing some support and scaffolding in order to make progress. And it's a bit Goldilocks, isn't it? That's why I put the Goldilocks picture there for you. Okay, so we're going to then think about some of the approaches that are, I'm going to go back a few slides because I missed out a slide because I put it in the wrong place. So this is what research is suggesting is really where, if we're going to ensure children have access to high quality teaching, what are the features that needs to be? And this is some very recent research, only came out in March last year, around the best approaches for children with special needs. So what it says is to a large extent, good teaching for pupils with SEN is good teaching for all. I'm sure you've heard that before. It is certainly true. There isn't a magic bullet, unfortunately. There isn't. But we have a lot of those strategies, those powerful strategies in place already for all children that we just need to apply consistently for children with SEN. Research suggests that there are some strategies that we should consider emphasising for pupils with SEN and use flexibly in responding to the needs of all pupils. And I'm going to touch on some of those today, okay, through this. We haven't got time to do them all, but we'll look at some of them now. Okay, so first of all, scaffolding, and somebody already mentioned that in one of the other chat boxes, which is great. So this is where we're really providing temporary support for learning, and I'm beginning to take it away when it's no longer required. Too much scaffolding, yeah, is going to end up with that child becoming dependent on it, and actually, you know, whenever we try and put it away, they're just down tools. Yeah, so it's about trying to just enough scaffolding to make that activity, that area of learning, accessible for them. So just enough so they complete the task that they couldn't perhaps do independently. Again, it emphasises effective assessment is needed, first of all, to gain a precise understanding of the pupil's current capabilities. So we've really nailed that, haven't we, today? That support, it could be visual, could be verbal, could be written. It doesn't necessarily always have to be the presence of a teaching assistant. Gradually removing it as they become more independent. Some children will need that in place for longer than others in order to promote confidence, competence. And we talked right at the beginning, you mentioned in the chat box, some of you, some of those children who, you know, one child you mentioned who had no self-belief, didn't believe he could do anything, you know, low self-esteem. There's going to be a need for quite a lot of scaffolding for a while, maybe in terms of emotional support. Working with another child maybe can be the scaffold, boosting his confidence before maybe beginning to sort of build that self-efficacy again. Or it might be things like writing frames, aid memoirs to support memory, peer support I've just mentioned. So, you know, actually not always a TA helping, but maybe sitting with another child who maybe is more able in some areas that can support them. Making use of your classroom environment in terms of information around the classroom that they can draw upon to support them in becoming more independent. We'll talk a bit more about that later on. Checklists are useful, and use of things like manipulatives as well in maths, not always taking those away too quickly and too soon. So when we're talking about that class design, we need to be thinking about, are we regularly utilising multisensory teaching approaches? So thinking about how much of what I'm doing can I replace me talking with more seeing and doing? You know, whether it be drama, yeah, acting things out. You know, you can use drama in any curriculum area, absolutely any. I went into a secondary classroom, it was a while ago now, but and there was a teacher who was wanting to teach about gases and the density of gases, and he got every child to become a gas molecule. I think that's the right terminology. I'm not 100% sure. You know, sort of gas molecule and how they bashed together, and you know how they bonded together, and then what broke them apart again. It was absolutely fantastic. Breaking down the learning into smaller mini tasks, and this is so important. Just being able to help that child navigate their way through an activity, and use of things like task management boards, which I'll show you one here or a couple here, is going to be useful there. It's a very simple one at the bottom there. That's now, next, then. And it might be, there are pictures or images in there rather than words, depending on what that child's reading ability is like, to more complex task management boards, or more detailed ones rather, you know, that you've got on the right hand side. You know, it might be that you do one of those for the whole class. That's being inclusive by design. Yeah, so those children who need it will refer to it. Some will, some won't, but probably more will than won't, I would argue. Pre-teach, that's an element of scaffolding. It's better to keep up than to have to catch up, isn't it? So if you've got that child with a vocabulary, language difficulty, maybe with Lewis, and you've identified some of his receptive language isn't great, so maybe there's a need to sort of read that story that you're going to have with the whole class, but do it maybe with him and a few other children beforehand, maybe at the end of the previous school day or the beginning of the school day, maybe with a TA, sort of to talk about some of the language and vocabulary in that story, so that when you come to approach it as a whole class, they can hit the ground running with that. Probably more likely to engage than switch off in a whole class context as well. Connecting new content with pupils' existing knowledge. And this is really important for children with SEN who don't always automatically make those connections. So the importance of just going back again before you go forward, that sort of overlearning, just picking up where we left off, that's a bit of an assessment for learning process as well, isn't it? Just making sure that they've really understood where we're coming from. Alternative methods of recording is important, certainly as a bit of a scaffold as well. Do they always need to record things as a narrative? Could it be that they could do a more oral recording or a PowerPoint presentation or bullet points or whatever it might be, even if that's a stepping stone to actually writing something more in more of a narrative? Planned breaks. So a number of you talked about children with a bit of a sensory profile there, a child walking around the class all the time, disturbing others. Actually, we may need to plan in some sensory breaks for children like that. Maybe we do it for the whole class and make it inclusive by design. But yeah, planning those in, maybe in having those regular breaks, it will mean that you get more intensive time, shorter periods, but more intensive time working if actually they've had a bit of time to have some of those sensory breaks built in to that school day. And chances are you're going to have less need to have a go at them all the time, and then brings you down and it brings the child down as well. And less likely for them to have to be missing break times and things like that. And that's actually exactly what they need. Those children, the kids that need those break times more than anybody else, arguably. So use of IT as well, certainly, we've done a lot more of that actually whilst children have been remote learning. And it might be, if you're lucky enough to have had a few more laptops and such like brought into school from the government scheme. I know there's not been anywhere near as many as we've needed, but hopefully using that more of that the speech to text software, children who've got that fine motor control difficulty, actually maybe taking away from that by actually doing a lot more recording of writing using the keyboard, and touch typing skills, things like BBC Dance Mat, getting them to be able to touch type is going to be a skill for life for some of them. Organising thoughts and writing. I'm going to just give an example here of what I mean by that. So often children, they're at that stage of being able to write where they might have, quite good ideas, but actually the organisation of that is a challenge. And sometimes what we can end up doing is we can end up having a TA sat with them who's scribing the ideas, and is writing them on a whiteboard, and then that child is just writing that into their book. And let's be fair, that's basically handwriting practice, isn't it? So we want to, that's too much scaffolding. We need to sort of put away from that. It might be that might be an appropriate at one point, but we can't keep doing that. We need to pull away from that. So post-it planning is a nice idea if you've not tried that already. So this is the idea where the children write down one idea on one post-it note. It might be actually that child the TA might be able to write that idea on a post-it note. Okay, so the TA might do that, or maybe another child does it. Maybe they do it in pairs. And then when they've got their ideas for their story or whatever it is they're writing, they then organise them in an order. So get a sheet of plain paper and they put them in an order of what they want, how they want to write them. And they then go into writing one sentence, maybe initially for each idea. You might want to build it up in time to 2 sentences for each idea, or maybe one sentence with a noun in it, one sentence with an adjective in it, or something, or both. It depends where they are at, again, where they're at in their learning. And then they write that up. And then every time they've written that idea, they take that Post-it note off, screw it up and put it away, so they can see themselves progressing through that activity. Might be that they do that on a computer. And then things like writing on every other line. So if we go back to Lewis's piece of writing again, can you see how none of his descenders, none of the Y's or the F's go below the line? And often children do that when their writing is quite big, still at this stage, because if they write their descenders below the line, like the F, when they go to write on the next line, it gets in the way of what they want to write. So they end up just never writing, the descenders below the line. So what you either do, you give them lined paper that is appropriate to their handwriting, or the other alternative is for them to write on every other line. And actually, that's a lot easier when you're marking them as well, to be marking their books. So all I simply used to do was just get children to put a dot on every other line in their book, so they just automatically knew which line to write on and which they didn't. Check it bell. So, we're always wanting children to read back their writing, check for sense, check the full stops and capital letters. And actually, a nice idea then is actually where they check each other's, particularly if they've been doing this Post-it planning together, every now and again, ding the bell, everybody swaps books and checks that actually what they've written makes sense to each other. If we've got finger spaces problems, having a little bit of blue tack could be good to just keep moving along, so they always remember that they've got to put a space between the words. Vocab banks, we're going to come to that in a bit of time. Okay. So one of the other things we're talking about important is explicit instruction. So this is making sure that you're doing things like modelling, teaching those skills in small steps, and you're being very explicit about what they are. Very clear, unambiguous language. Examples and non-examples. So actually, sharing a piece of work where the full stops are in the wrong place, and then getting children to read it and hear and feel, actually, that doesn't make any sense when that full stop is there. So those kind of activities can help there as well. Making sure you're just really planning for those common misconceptions. As you get more skilled and more experienced, you begin to know where those common errors occur and plan for them. Removing distracting information, that's really important for children who have that visual processing challenge as well, where there's just too much information sometimes on the books, on the page, on the board, on the whiteboard, on your PowerPoint, just putting that away. Building in retrieval practice, so where we're particularly having to remember and learn things remotely, sort of thing, that we're building that in, and pre-teach activities are quite useful for things like that. So moving on to the way you're speaking and teaching in your lessons as well, just being able to really think carefully about just chunking up what you're saying, slowing down, ordering what you're saying so it's in a logical sequential order. So rather than saying, before we pack up and go into assembly, I want you to ... Okay, you do it the other way around. So first, I need you to do this. Then I need you to do this. Then we're going to line up and get ready to go into assembly. Always checking for understanding. You can never do that enough, in my opinion, with children. Just checking that they're really following what you're asking them to do. New vocabulary I'm going to move on to now. So this is where the brilliance of things like dual coding, which you may have heard of, really comes into its own, and it's really important here to be thinking about that the new vocabulary, particularly if it's topic related vocabulary that is going to be a challenge for children with language difficulties. And just thinking about, can we find an image to go with that word? So I've got evaporation here. So think of an image to go around. And the Noun Project website is absolutely brilliant. There's practically, just type in a word and an image can come up for you. But even better, actually, children come up with them themselves. and just highlighting maybe the bit in the word where the spelling might be tricky. Evaporation, evaporation, evaporation. So we can see that or in there. And it might even be that you can think of a gesture to go with that as well. So you were really multi-sensory there as well, aren't we? Okay. So here, I want you to think about really your classroom environment and having those resources in and around your classroom that are going to support that child, those children to be more independent. So Lewis is going to need his phonics charts, isn't he? Yeah, he's going to need his high frequency words. He may well need his dual-coded key subject vocabulary when he's doing his stories or his writing. I won't go through all of them, but number lines, you know, much better than number grids when children are still working out place value. Number grids are all right if you've got place value nailed, but because you know what comes after 20, well 21 does, but actually on the number grid, you know, 29 sits right under it, so it can be confusing unless I say they've got that really well versed in that. Things like thesauruses rather than dictionaries. Dictionaries are fine if you can spell. You know, if you're going to write the word enormous, where do you start? Enormous, enormous, enormous. But if you've got a thesaurus, you can look up the word big, couldn't you? And then you'll see the word enormous there as well. Think about your dyslexic friendly environments as well, and think about, you know, anything you're producing in terms of any worksheets for them, if you do a few worksheets every now and again, and certainly with your whiteboards as well. Your classroom environment, trying to make sure it's as uncluttered and organised as it can. I think actually we're pretty uncluttered now because of COVID. They're less cluttered than they ever were, I think. But just aware of those children with those sensory processing difficulties, and just have a think about anything that may be adding to that sensual disturbance for that child. Visual timetables particularly. Hopefully you're all using those. That's not just for children on the autism spectrum. All children, you know, benefit from having those visual timetables really, where it just should be part and parcel of our classroom environments all the time. So just thinking about your use of teaching assistants here, I appreciate there's quite a lot on this page that you'll want to go back and have a look at afterwards, really. And there's really a whole teaching session in the effective use of TAs, which you may have hopefully touched on within the training. But it's how you deploy your TA, if you have TA working with you, even when they're working with a child with an education, health and care plan, it is really important that we're trying to ensure that the teaching assistants are making sure that children are owning their own learning, that they're not just there to make sure the child's get the work done, but is actually really thinking about how they're helping them become more independent. So we want to see less of the just general correcting, you know, giving them the answer, or you know, but we're moving from things like modelling. We might do that initially, but then we're going to take that scaffolding away a bit and make sure they're doing a little bit more cluing. So just prompting them really, you know, might Aruna help you? How could Aruna help you? So the prompting, actually, can you remember what your teacher said for you to do first? You know, so actually giving them time to stop and think. Right, so they're not automatically assuming if I sit here long enough, someone's going to answer the question for me and get the work and help me do the work. To self-scaffolding, we're really where that the teaching assistant is observing and just stepping in, giving the least amount of support and help first. Now, with children with SEN, that's going to look different depending on what you're doing, but ultimately, you're wanting to continue to keep moving up towards seeing that TA actually pulling away from support and not over-supporting. So we're after really creating a positive and supportive learning environment for all children. And it really doesn't happen by accident. We need to make sure that we're thinking about what we can do to adapt our teaching for all children, so that we're not necessarily always having to do something completely separate and different for children on the SEN register. That will have to happen for some children in some situations, but we're trying to do as much as we can, trying to make it inclusive by the way we're designing our lessons for the ways that we've talked about it today. So considering your best endeavours. So your best endeavours basically is a regulation really in the code of practice. We have to do this. And this is making sure that we are not giving up with any of our children. Yeah, if something doesn't work, we're trying to think about why it didn't work, and we're trying to find another way around that barrier to learning. And we don't do that on our own. We do that in conjunction with other people that we're working with as well, our colleagues as well. Making sure we set high expectations, even for our most challenging pupils. There might really be a difficulty, in getting there, but we're still going to believe and expect that they can. Your everyday interactions, they really do make an impact. Everything you say, everything you do, trying to make it positive. Maximising access to high quality teaching, as we've talked about really all along here. And this has come from research, and I'm just reiterating that really now, including the evidence that actually impact of including pupils without SEND concluded that such inclusive policy resulted in a positive impact on their academic outcomes. So when you're inclusive of children with SEND, it has an impact on children without SEN as well. So some of the best sources of guidance that you can utilise really are things from around those different areas of need there. I'll leave those with you to have a look at, but they've got lots of, particularly the Communication Trust, Autism Education Trust and Driver Youth Trust, really brilliant for speech and language, autism and dyslexia. Lots of ideas there. Okay, so I'm just going to stop us there, and I'd like us just because we're coming to the last 15 minutes now, I'd like us to go back into, we just come out of this a minute, come back into our groups then, our breakout groups, and I'd just like us to have a reflection on the children that you have got in your class at the moment with SEN, and I'd just like to share in your breakout groups anything that you've done around scaffolding support that has helped that child, but actually has benefited other children as well. Okay, so trying to think about things that you do already successfully that are inclusive for all children, but are really benefiting those children with SEN. Okay, so I'm going to give you about 8 minutes, if that's all right, Sally.
Yeah, brilliant. Thanks, Kate. I'll open the rooms now. You should be with the same colleagues, so you won't have to introduce yourselves again. And again, I'll give you a warning before you are brought back into the main room.
Brilliant.
Just a quick reminder, microphones and cameras on. Thanks.
Fabulous. Okay, people. Really interested to hear what it's just some thoughts. Again, pop them in the chat box. Anything that you think that an approach, a strategy, something that you've done that's been great for kids with SEN, but actually it's been great for all children as well. So absolutely anything that you think. It might be some of the things we mentioned earlier on. Emotional regulation chart. Yeah, I need one of those. I think every household needs an emotional regulation chart. Visual timetables, so good that you're using those. Really great. They're so good for, and it might be for some children that they might need their own individual version of that as well. I've even done visual timetables that go through a lesson. Again, sometimes that helps children where they are really just very, very small amount of activity followed by something that's off task, and then another little activity and off task. That can be useful as well. Visual timer, yeah. Emotion toys, worry monsters, fabulous. You can get those little keyring ones, can't you, as well? Hot images and hot seating to support writing ideas. And look at that. That is visual and it's kinesthetic, isn't it? just, I mean, hot seating is like drama, you know. There are going to be some kids who, that's the last thing they want to do, but they're going to benefit from seeing other children do that. So great, Sarah. I wish I was in your classroom watching you do that. Chunking writing, missing words to fill the gaps. Yeah, that's a useful stepping stone, isn't it? To helping structure sentences. That's a stage in the scaffolding. So you'll be wanting to see over time, maybe Laura just beginning to take that away when that starts getting a bit too easy for them. Yeah, that's when to start putting away from that. Using post-it notes to show work to do. Yes, it's like using that as task management. These could be ripped up, put in the bin. Yeah, what a sense of satisfaction. It's like, having your here's my to-do list. Yeah, and I love nothing more than scribbling through. I mean, I don't just put a line through it, I just scribble through it. And when I've done it, and it's same with screwing up that post-it note, sense of satisfaction. Brilliant. Pre-teaching topic vocabulary. How brilliant is that? It might be, Lucy, you want to add to that by maybe dual coding some of those pieces of vocabulary. Maybe even getting the children to do their own little image to go with that word, possibly, and their own gesture. Maybe when they come back into class, they can teach that to the other children as well. Is there something in that word, that vocab, that might be a tricky bit of spelling? Can they highlight and identify that as well? So that's making that even more memorable for them. Dual coding, pre-teaching vocab, brilliant. Whole class group, working well, plenty of vocabulary needed throughout the cohort. Thank you for saying that, Jodie. That's really reiterating the messages today. Avatars as a way of communicating difficult feelings and emotions. Yeah, really, really useful for children who find it difficult to position themselves in that emotion. It's sort of making sure it's standing alongside them, isn't it? So it's helping them be curious about what they're thinking and feeling without actually apportioning any sense of shame or responsibility on it for themselves. It's standing slightly outside of themselves. What a great idea. After breakout, our lesson is 80 minutes. We do a few laps of the playgrounds halfway through a movement break. Brilliant. Yeah, absolutely. And it might be for some children, you think, God, I could be giving them a sensory movement break every 20 minutes. And for those children, it might be you do something a bit surreptitious, like you might say, okay, Jamie, let's use Jamie as an analogy again. Can you just hand out these books? Yeah, or can you collect in something? Or can you take a message to somebody? Or can you wipe down my whiteboard? And literally that movement, that activity can just, keep them self-regulated. It's just about picking up the signs, isn't it? And as you get to know children, you'll do that a little bit more. Great. So I've just put my children in mixed ability pairs. This has really helped improve their ability, really boosts self-esteem. Oh, fantastic, Claire. And you know what? In that research that I showed you earlier on, and I know I whizzed through a lot of things, but you can, look back at this later on, you will see that one of them was about grouping children, and that in and of itself, very simple thing to do, will, likely to encourage greater engagement. And so it's not always a TA, as I say, that sits with that low ability group, the same group, and supports them. Actually that mixed ability pairs helps with their self-esteem and with their engagement in learning as well. So it's great that you found that out, Claire, as well. Fabulous. Okay, so I'm just going to get back to screen share just for the final slide, because I know we're at time now. We have to finish. And it's really just focusing again on that phrase, best endeavours. And I really want that ringing in your ears now, because it is a requirement of the code of practice, but it just basically is saying to us that we need to make sure children with SEND get the support they need. It means doing everything we can. But it doesn't always mean that we get everything right. Yeah, we won't. I never did. Sammy never did. you know, but you learn as much through when things go wrong, and you're driving home from work and you think, what a rubbish day I had with X, Y, or Z child, or maybe more than one child. But it's doing that assess, plan, do, review, thinking what was going on there, what maybe could I adapt or change tomorrow to make that better. And if you have absolutely no blinking idea, that's when you need to be calling on other people in your school, other professionals, and maybe school call on people, specialists like educational psychologists, etc., to help you there. You're never, ever on your own with that. You don't have to be a specialist in every area of SEN. You don't need to know all those labels and what they mean, etc. You know, because anyway, you know, you could have 2 children with autism in your class and they'll present very, very differently anyway. They're all individuals anyway. So you don't need to be expert in all areas of SEN. You just need to be increasingly expert at the children you have in front of you at the moment in your class. And incrementally, if you use your best endeavours, if you think reflectively, assess, plan, do, review, if you learn to focus a bit more on the assess before you think about the plan, you know, slowing down a bit before you speed up, sometimes you can sort of be more aware of what those problems are underneath the iceberg. But you're all going to be brilliant teachers. I know you will. And I know sometimes you are going to be tearing your hair out with some children with SEN and thinking, what am I doing? But they will make you better teachers. Yeah, for every child that has these difficulties, they incrementally make you a better teacher over time. So good luck to everybody. I'm going to stay on the line now for, you know, 5-10 minutes afterwards or so, just to pick up any questions that you might have, because I know you haven't actually had time to opportunity today just to speak. You've been brilliant in the chat box, absolutely brilliant. I'm sure you have in your breakout rooms as well. But I want to make sure you have an opportunity, if you've got individual questions about children that you're teaching at the moment and you want to offload or you want to share, I'm here for the next 15 minutes to sort of take those questions as well. But you probably want to say, thanks very much, but I've had enough today. I want to go out and have a walk, in which case do that as well. And you can always email me at another point as well.
In the lovely sunshine, Kate. Can I just, Kate, thank you for such a really useful session. And I hope colleagues do use the bank of resources, which will be available on the members area, or use this PowerPoint as a bank of resources, because there's lots of key and useful ideas to refer back to. Please do. I've put the link in the chat for the evaluation. As with everything we do at Gateway, we really are interested in your feedback. If you could just take a minute of your time to complete that, that would be great. Lisa will also send out the link with an email. So thank you again, Kate. Thank you, colleagues, for coming. I know you know, you're probably all shattered. I hope you have a lovely Easter. Our next event after Easter is on the 27th of April, and we'll send some timing confirmations out around that. It's our Teaching and Learning Conference with Isabella Wallace. It'll be another great session. We think that's going to take place in the morning online, probably 9 till 12:30, but we'll send a confirmation out around that. Okay, we'll stay on. Kate and I will stay on if anybody wants to put their microphones or cameras on and talk to us. If not, have a lovely evening.